Observations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
This is Robservations, episode number 618. And you know, there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on today in the world of genre entertainment, but something which always fascinates me. So, for those of you who might not know, when you are going to say, let's say you want to adapt your favorite book, pick your favorite book. I don't know, The Stand. The Stand just wrapped up. You want to adapt The Stand. So there's a number of things that you have to do. And one of the thing that you're looking to achieve is something called chain of title. Or let's say you find a great screenplay that a friend of yours wrote, or somebody that you didn't know, but you read their script and you thought it was great. One of the very first things that a great Hollywood producer has to do is establish a clear chain of title for whatever it is you want to make. Now, what that means is essentially the ownership of that piece of material, whether it's a book, a short story, a magazine article, a screenplay. You have to show ownership before you can actually make it. Clear chain of title. So the way you do that is usually you do what's called you option the material. So basically you have a contract between you and whatever the thing is you're going to option, whether it's an author's book or a short story, a magazine article, a screenplay. You make a contract, which is an option agreement. And basically the option is an option to buy it eventually. But this is just an option, so you might have, let's call it an 18-month option. So you might pay the rights holder a certain amount of money for the sake of argument. Let's just say $1,000 or $5,000. Let's make it $1,000 and keep it easy. And then you negotiate a short form, usually a short form agreement of the basic bullet points of the deal. So the idea is, and the biggest thing that you negotiate in an option is the floor and the ceiling of what the purchase price of whatever the material is. So what that means is, so say it's a novel, it could be based on the budget. If you're going to make the movie for $100 million, the ceiling of how much you're going to buy the material for is high. But if you're going to make it for $1 million, then the ceiling is low and the floor is, so the floor is at whatever the minimum payment is. So say you're going to buy a book. Let's just make it easy. Let's say you're going to buy a book from Stephen King. But forget that he's rich and famous, Stephen King. He's just Stephen King. Forget there's any movies made. So for Stephen King, you're like, I read the book Rage, which is the first of the Bachman books. It hasn't been made into a movie. And you go, Mr. King, I want to make this. I would like to option this book for 18 months. So what you're doing is you're optioning that material and you pay Stephen King $1,000. So basically, you've now bought yourself 18 months to try and get the movie made. He won't allow anyone else to do that. You can shop it around. You can do what you want. And in that option agreement, it states that if the movie gets made at a certain budget level, Stephen King will be paid, let's say, $500,000 for the rights to his book. You are buying the book from him for $500,000, and you're giving him the $500,000. If the movie's made for $50 million, then he gets, let's say, $1 million or $2 million, whatever it is. He gets $2 million, whatever. That's the purchase price. That means you're going to exercise the option and buy the material, in which case you're going to make the movie. And as long as all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, you can show what's called chain of title, which means your option agreement was on the up and up. Everything that you negotiated was proper. That's why you need a good entertainment lawyer. And then when it came time, you got the money after 18 months to make the film. You then were going to buy the material from Stephen King for either $500,000 or $1 million or whatever. And everything was papered. The deals were papered correctly. And then you have clean chain of title that shows you own whatever the material is you wanted to make. And it's true of everything. Look, oversimplification, but that's it in a nutshell. The important lesson here is to make sure that all of this paperwork was in order and it was properly executed. Everybody who had to sign it had to sign it. All the parties agreed on everything. So then what happens is when you are going to go to your financier or a studio or whatever, you need to present this material to show that, yes, in fact, you do own this book. So now we can make Stephen King's novel Rage, the first of the Bachman books, into a movie because you have clear chain of title. It's a very simple thing, but sometimes you'd be surprised how many times in Hollywood find out what happened to the modern remake of Dukes of Hazzard. Just make sure that you have clear chain of title. That's producing 101. Very important. So today, in the Hollywood Reporter, there was a very interesting article that I wanted to share with you. And I would like to show this to you. I was shocked by this. Look at this. Judge can't figure out who owns rights to the Jack Ryan character. Now, for those of you keeping score at home, Jack Ryan is, of course, the character created by author Tom Clancy, and the first Jack Ryan novel was The Hunt for Red October, and Alec Baldwin played the character in that 1990 movie. Alec Baldwin was later replaced by Harrison Ford, who played Jack Ryan in both Patriot Games and Clear and Present Danger. Then the role was recast again as Ben Affleck in The Sum of All Fears. And then, of course, Chris Pine played him in Jack Ryan Shadow Recruit. And, of course, John Krasinski now plays the character of Jack Ryan on the Jack Ryan series on Amazon. So, a lot of different Jack Ryans there. Mace Neufeld owned the Jack Ryan character. Now, of course, John Clark, who's now being played by Michael B. Jordan. John Clark was previously played by Willem Dafoe and Liev Schreiber. Willem Dafoe in Clear and Present Danger and Liev Schreiber in Some of All Fears. Now John Clark is Michael B. Jordan in the upcoming, Amazon purchased it, Without Remorse. Anyway, it all began with one book, Hunt for Red October, written by Tom Clancy. Well, what I found really interesting was this article. As somebody who is a student of Hollywood and somebody who also has had to acquire things and made sure my chain of title was clean, I read this headline and I was like, oh my God, how could this happen? How could a judge not figure out who owns the rights to Jack Ryan? How is that possible? So I delved into it. Now, what's really interesting about Jack Ryan is the first people to publish the first Jack Ryan novel, Hunt for Red October, was the Navy, the U.S. Navy. It was released in a small run by the Navy before it achieved worldwide success. But anyway, let's delve into this, shall we? Consider it miraculous that Tom Clancy's CIA character of Jack Ryan has appeared so often in movies and a recent Amazon Prime show starring John Krasinski. That's because this literary creation, first seen in The Hunt for Red October, has prompted an ownership dispute for the ages. On Wednesday, a federal judge in Maryland took a crack at unwinding the situation, but after 89 pages of backstory and legal discussion, got no closer to finding an answer on who really owns the rights to Jack Ryan, and a trial may be coming. Although there's a lot to take from the summary judgment opinion of U.S. District Attorney Judge Ellen Hollander, read in full below, we'll narrow the focus as best we can to Jack Ryan, giving his enduring place in popular culture. The dispute involves a disagreement with the U.S. military, a divorce, a death, and enough paperwork to curdle the blood of any non-lawyer. In 1984, Tom Clancy's The Hunt for Red October came out. The book was published by the United States Naval Institute, which quickly licensed a theatrical film from Paramount Pictures. Based on the success, Clancy got to work on more stories about Jack Ryan. The author would start a company, called Jack Ryan Enterprises Limited and licensed Paramount to make more Jack Ryan films based on Clear and Present Danger and Patriot Games. But in 1987, in the midst of negotiations between Clancy and Viacom for a television series based on Patriot Games, a dispute rose over the ownership of the Jack Ryan character. This was 34 years ago. Had Clancy retained the rights to Jack Ryan in his contract for The Hunt for Red October with the Naval Institute, who first published the book? Had Clancy kept rights because he allegedly developed the character in Patriot Games first? Those questions were briefly entertained in a proceeding before the American Arbitration Association before the two sides settled. Clancy gave $125,000 to the Naval Institute, which in return agreed to reassign the copyright to The Hunt for Red October to Clancy's Jack Ryan Enterprises. Okay, what's really important here is it doesn't really go into the actual deal points, but apparently in order to get Hunt for Red October published, Jack Ryan, the character, and certain rights were turned over by Tom Clancy to the Navy, the Naval Institute, small press, whatever. Now, by the way, for you lawyers out there, and for you, especially you writers, never turn over the rights of your creation to a publisher. Never. A publisher is a publisher, but you retain the rights. It's good to know moving forward. So anyway, there was a dispute because of disagreements or whatever. So this is a classic case of muddying the clear chain of title. Somehow, even back in 87, they were developing a TV series and who owned the characters. There was some kind of shenanigans. These kinds of things should be cut and dried, but they are not. They are not, because it ain't show friends. It is show business, and everyone is trying to get into your business, especially if you've written a book that's a bestseller. But in 1987, in the midst of negotiations between Clancy and Viacom for a television series based on Patriot Games, not even Hunt for Red October, but Patriot Games, a dispute arose over ownership of the Jack Ryan character. Had Clancy retained the rights to Jack Ryan in his contract for the Hunt for Red October with the Naval Institute? Because what they were doing was they were getting a contract probably for the book, but not necessarily the character himself. Because the book was the book, but you're not thinking, oh, the main character of this book, or one of the main characters, is going to now become the star of a franchise. Had Clancy kept rights because he allegedly developed the character in Patriot Games first? Well, it says in 87, in the midst of negotiations between Clancy and Viacom for Patriot Games, whereas he sold the book Hunt for Red October in 84. So was he writing multiple books with the Jack Ryan character? We don't know. Had Clancy kept the rights because he allegedly developed the character in Patriot Games first? Those questions were briefly entertained in a proceeding before the American Arbitration Association before the two sides settled. Clancy gave $125,000 to the Naval Institute, which in return agreed to reassign the copyright to Hunt for Red October to Clancy's company. So he owned it. Should be no problem. Any question? Jack Ryan character, owned by Clancy. Thereafter, Clancy and his then wife, Wanda King, formed Jack Ryan Limited Partnership, which basically became the family's book business. That makes sense. You're sharing everything with your wife. You start a business, your character, it's yours, which basically became the family's book business. Clancy was technically an employee of the partnership. So Tom Clancy, even though he sets up, when you have an LLC or an employee of your own LLC, it pays you out. Clancy was technically an employee of the partnership, which made publishing and licensing deals with other people. And then, in the mid-90s, when Clancy split from his wife, King, he formed yet another company called Rubicon. I just want to point out, already there's a hole in the side of the hull and the boat is filling with water. Rights were divided and assigned throughout the years although a degree of confusion has long lingered. For example, in 2008, when Paramount announced it was developing a new movie titled Jack Ryan Shadow Recruit, Clancy's then agent Michael Ovitz wrote to him, "The problem with all of this is that you have no legal way to stop them from using your Jack Ryan character, because long before I met you, prior representatives gave away the rights to use Jack Ryan to Paramount at their discretion, without your permission or involvement." This is why you need a good entertainment lawyer. If that wasn't enough, when Clancy passed away in 2013 at the age of 66, Alexandra Clancy, the author's second wife and widow, stepped forward to assert that ownership rights belong to the estate. And with agreements then being made for posthumous work, including new Jack Ryan books, she also served notices of termination with the intent of recapturing the rights to The Hunt for Red October after 35 years. In short, the rights to Clancy's work, having gone through one contract after another, and then divorce, and then death, and possibly more, was a complete mess, instigating lawsuits. So what could have been a clear chain of title, and all of you budding producers out there, a clear chain of title is something you must aspire to. It is holier than holy. Make sure that you always have a clear chain of title. In her decision this week, Judge Hollander tackles various questions ranging from statute of limitations on claims of ownership to whether a work for hire is precluded when an employee also owns the employer. She does rule that Clancy validly assigned rights to works, though it hardly answers the nearly 35-year-old question of ownership of the Jack Ryan character. Had the settlement between Clancy and the Naval Institute achieved assignment of character rights? What if the Naval Institute never owned that? Now, see, what's really interesting here is, I would imagine, when the Naval Institute acquired The Hunt for Red October, it was acquiring the book. And that what was in the book, we're publishing the book, and there was never thought as to, because, back then, who thought that the Jack Ryan character would have such life, that Jack Ryan would eventually become president of the United States in executive orders, which, by the way, is a badass book. I read all the Jack Ryan books, and I've read most of the John Clark books, of which ones I know of. So, but they probably didn't have they didn't carve out some side deal for the Jack Ryan character. So, have the settlement between Clancy and the Naval Institute achieved assignment of character rights? Probably not. What if the Naval Institute never owned that? Well, they probably didn't. Hollander acknowledges that characters may be protected independent of stories when they are especially distinctive, but that doesn't decide ownership over Jack Ryan, given the ambiguity of agreements. The settlement contains specific language about character rights. The transfer agreements did not. Because why would they? You're not going into a book and going through every different element. You're optioning the book, whatever's in the book. But you don't think that one character in the book is going to become the lead of a bunch of other books. Why would you think that? Because only one book had been written. So nowadays, people would anticipate, like, well, what about this main character? Like, what could it be in other books? Like, we should take care of that. But back then, in 84, what is that, 37 years ago, nobody was thinking that when the Naval Institute made some agreement. But anyway, after the divorce, Clancy wrote 7 novels featuring Jack Ryan without agreement with, objection by, or payment to the Jack Ryan entities. So basically, even his own company that he'd set up with his wife, that he was an employee of, he's writing Jack Ryan books that they didn't properly oversee. This states one section of the very long opinion. The fact that he was able to use the Jack Ryan character in these novels supports the view that the provision in the separation agreement confirmed Clancy's retention of ownership of the Jack Ryan character, as the plaintiff argues. But as defendants contend, it could also establish that their company, the Jack Ryan Company that his wife and Tom Clancy set up, they owned the Jack Ryan character, but that Clancy had the right to use the character in his work as a result of the grant of authorization in the separation agreement. In some, the sources on which both parties rely support their particular interpretations of the agreement, but they are not dispositive. After several dozen pages, basically the only thing the judge can conclude is that a reasonable jury could differ on what the evidence suggests. As such, without settlement, this one appears to be headed to trial. Let's see if there's more to this. Nope, I'm going to put this in there so you can read the entire thing. Now, what's amazing about this, and this harks back to the ownership of comic book characters or a million other things. There you go. There's the decision. Here's an author. Let's say you are an author and you've written a book like The Hunt for Red October, and you create all these characters, but specifically one particular character. It's your book. You own it. But because it ain't show friends and it's show business, and because you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate. Every single deal that you do, whether you're setting up your own LLC to manage your affair, whatever it is you're doing, it's of paramount importance. It's of paramount importance to make sure that you get what you negotiate. You have to be very, very clear, and you have to be very careful that even though you've owned something, that you own it. It's yours. You made it up. But when you make that deal, when somebody comes and options your property, options your story, you need to make sure that everything you do is copacetic, all on the up and up. You make sure that you are not giving away rights to your character. If you're going to publish a book through the Naval Press or any small press, you give them the option to publish your book, but they don't own anything in it beyond that. All of these things have to be taken into consideration before you do it. So you'd think we now have 5 Tom Clancy, well, if you include Without Remorse, 6 feature films. There was an old Tom Clancy TV series. Now you've got the John Clark film Without Remorse coming out with Michael B. Jordan on Amazon. I mean, Tom Clancy became a franchise industry unto himself. But he, through his own marriage and starting his own companies, he muddied his own waters. He made sure his chain of title was no longer clear. So the idea that somebody is arguing over Tom Clancy did in fact write The Hunt for Red October. He did in fact write the novels Patriot Games and Debt of Honor and Executive Orders and The Bear and the whatever it's called, The Bear and the Panda, the Bear and the Dragon, was that it? All of the Jack Ryan books, he created them. He made them. It made them up. It's his stuff. No one disputes that. But when you start assigning rights and doing things, it muddies the chain of title, which you do not want to happen ever. Ever. Therein lies death. So right now, nobody knows, as I would assume that they're going to do a 3rd season of Jack Ryan, a judge can't figure out who owns this character. You'd think it would be simple and cut and dried, which it would be if everybody has things, remember this, creators out there. If somebody options your project, always build in some kind of a reversion clause where it reverts back to you. All the rights revert back to you after a certain time. And make sure it sticks. Get that, because you deserve a reversion clause, because there is no reason why you shouldn't own your own creation, nor the estate that you've created, nor your family. It should be always in the family, and you should own it. But not now. I mean, you'd think Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan? No one knows who owns him? This, my friends, should never happen. Hopefully, if you have a good entertainment lawyer, it won't happen to you. But it is fascinating. It's a fascinating subject. And I read this and I'm like, wow. And this isn't chump change either. This is very lucrative stuff, and it's pretty amazing. I read this and I was what my favorite word from England or the UK. I was gobsmacked when I read this. I was like, how can this be? for he is the Kwisatz But no, it's very, very strange. But, you know, it's the importance of It Ain't Show Friends. It's show business.